Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, dear participants. Allowing the opportunity to welcome you to our joint webinar on creating green, sustainable supply chains in the circular economy. We're now at about 150 participants from all over the world, which is always very encouraging. And I'm very glad to see many familiar faces rejoining us from our last webinar, which we held with Empower, which was on the role of education and capacity building in achieving SDG 3 pertaining to health. Today, we have speakers from academia, NGOs, and the UN. So we are certain that you will learn a lot on the topic of green supply chains and circularity from a holistic approach. I'm pleased to welcome Mr. Alessandro Pereira from I-17, of which he is the founder, who will be talking about challenges in creating green supply chain and how the SMEP, which is the Sustainable Manufacturing and Environmental Pollution Program project, which Alessandro does in coordination with UNCTAD, addresses these issues. We also have Glenn Wilson and Enrique Pacini from UNCTAD, the UN Conference on Trade and Development, who will then go into greater detail of sustainable manufacturing and circularity by using the SMEP project as a case study. Finally, we also have Professor Paul Alvani, who you may recognize from our previous webinar, who is the Executive Director of Empower School of Health, as well as Ms. Kavita Nair, the Deputy Director of this school, who will share with us their insights on green supply chains in healthcare and the health industry. I'll also just remind you that we will be having a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So if you have any questions, do feel free to write them down in the Q&A tool that you should have at the bottom of your screen, and not the chat. Otherwise, we won't be able to see your questions. And perhaps before we proceed with the first presentation by Professor Paul and Kavita, I'll ask for 2 or 3 minutes of your time to fill in the questions in the poll that should be appearing in front of your screen right now. And the result of this poll will simply help us get to know you a little bit better and understand where you're from. Thank you. So we'll just take 2 minutes. Okay, so we're now at about 47%. So perhaps 1 more minute or so.
So the results from the poll are in, and we can see that over 65% of the attendees are male, with 35% female. The majority of the participants are coming from the age range 30 to 40 years old, and the second most popular age group being under 30. And we have 62% of the respondees to the poll coming from Africa. The second most popular region is Asia. And then for what is your academic background of choice, health has gotten 53%, and management, engineering, and technology both are at 10%, with the other ones coming closely behind. Then for work experience, 6 to 10 years and less than 5 years are pretty equal, which is good to see. And then we have working professionals as the most common response for what the attendees are, and student being the second most popular. And
Thanks for that, Iman. So I think at this point we can close the poll. Very encouraging results indeed, very much in line with our usual demographics, if I may. So on this note, Professor Paul, why don't you start your presentation while you're sharing your screen. I'll take this opportunity to also introduce you to our audience. For those of you who don't know Professor Paul, Mr. Lalvani has over 25 years of experience in capacity building, procurement and supply chain, access to medicine and technology transfer. He has conducted assessments and supported capacity building in clinics of Kabul, Port Moresby and Sana'a. On the other end in the spectrum, he has advised board members, ministers of health in more than 30 countries, heads of states, foundations, UN agencies, and other donors on strategy, vision, advocacy, and impact. Mr. Lalvani is the executive director and founder of Empower School of Health. He has an MBA from Northwestern University, Kellogg Graduate School of Management, and an undergraduate degree in pharmacy. His vision is to create public health and PSM heroes through a continuous learning environment. Professor Paul, it's always a pleasure. Whenever you're ready, please feel free to take the floor.
Thank you very much. Just want to make sure you can hear me and you can see the screen.
Yes.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. Based on the demographics, Imam, thank you for sharing that. I'm twice your age, but I do come from, I've spent most of my life in Africa and Asia. So we have that in common, and from the health background. So I'll be speaking on the health sector, and I'll be supported by Kavita, who will give you specific examples from the country. And then the other speakers will be speaking about other sectors as well. So I'll kick off with health and about green and sustainability. Okay. Let's see. There we go. So everyone by now is familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals. What is unique about health within the SDGs is that it really does connect with all 17 of the SDGs or the 16 other SDGs. So I'll speak a little bit about health first and then go into health supply chain and then talk about sustainability and green. And a lot of what I will be mentioning will be some of those principles will be emphasized by the other speakers. So when they talk about manufacturing in a different industry, it'll be equally applicable in the pharma industry or the other healthcare sector as well. So first of all, what is a sustainable healthcare system? And if we refer to WHO's definition, a sustainable healthcare system that improves, maintains or restores health, that's on one side, focused on the health side, while minimizing negative impacts on the environment and leveraging opportunities to restore and to improve it to the benefit of health and well-being of current and future generations. And of course, there are times when it comes to emergencies and response where we forget about sustainability and everything else, and we're just knee-deep trying to respond to a particular event, a pandemic as an example, or responding to a natural disaster, which might need healthcare responses. But as much as possible, the idea is the twinning of both of those, focused on the healthcare and healthcare systems and focused on sustainability at the same time. As an example, what is green in healthcare? And here are 7 variables, 7 factors as what would be described as environmental friendly hospital, but the same thing can be applied to many other areas as well. So you'll keep hearing these and having some frameworks in mind is really useful, and there'll be other frameworks being presented as well. So when we talk about green, one aspect is energy efficiency, and everything, whether it's hospitals or manufacturing or auto or whatever else that we use, there's a lot of energy use that needs to be considered. Clinics, primary healthcare centers, all of them have this. Green building design, both whether it's too hot or too cold in an environment, how do we manage without needing too much energy or alternative sources of heat, cool, etc. Alternative energy generation, transportation, by having, and again, if a lot of people have to move, spend an hour getting to a healthcare facility in developed and developing nations, this becomes a big challenge. And in fact, UNITAR has a division which uses satellite planning, GIS mapping, which looks at where the population is, where the population is, where the health facilities are, and at the same time, where there's likely to be higher morbidity and mortality, and what should be the positioning to minimize transport and delays and access to health facilities. And the same thing is incredibly useful for supply chain as well. Food, as much as possible, local foods, local, organic, sustainable, vegetarian, moving in that direction. Waste, reduce, reuse, recycle, compost, and water, which is a big area where there can be a lot of savings. So when we talk about healthcare sustainability, what do some of the international organizations that are working in health, what are they focused on? What are they talking about? So I've given a few examples here. USAID is a bilateral government donor. The Global Fund is a multilateral coordinating agency that collects funds from multiple bilateral agencies and private donors, and supports with grants to various countries. And I used to work for the Global Fund. It's a tremendous organization. They have a budget now of $13 billion over 3 years that they normally provide grant funding. The World Bank, of course, you all know of that, and the World Health Organization. And all of them have really adapted their policies and strategies to focus on sustainability, resilience, self-sufficiency, inclusiveness, and equity, but linking it all. So there's sustainability, looking at it from a climate and a planet point of view, but there's also sustainability of an organization or an entity to ensure that it is operating and is self-sufficient. So within the healthcare system, there are 4 or 5 key pillars, and one of them is the healthcare supply chain. It's an area that we're going to focus on going forward. In the previous webinar that I had conducted with UNITAR, we focused on the health systems overall and what the other pillars were. So here we're talking about supply chain, and within the supply chain, we're focused on the greening of the supply chain. So when we talk about what is green supply chain, it really refers to the integration of environmental friendly practices and principles into the management of supply chain processes. It involves sustainable and eco-friendly measures throughout the supply chain process. What does something like that look like? So these are the words, but if you look at it visually, and if you start from the top of the circle, it's really, if you look at the outer circle, it's sourcing, manufacture, distribution, use. And I remember when the time when I was in academia, studying and working, the cycle stopped at distribution and use with customers. Recovery, the collection, sorting, recycling has been added in the last decade, really. And so as you can see, there's a green part, and towards the tail end, we've got collection, sorting, recycling. And within that, you see those smaller gray arrows that talk about landfill, litter, incineration. How do we get rid of these? How do we recycle as much of these as possible? And if we just focus on that last part of the cycle, you'll hear some of these words. How do we reduce the amount of content, packaging materials, etc., that we use? And in the case of healthcare, just to give you a sense, I mean, pandemic is one, but let me give you another example with bed nets. So insecticide-treated mosquito bed nets used for malaria. A country like Nigeria, which has, let's say, 200 million people, needs about 100 million bed nets. And those 100 million bed nets have to be recycled have to be replaced every 3 years, because they have a shelf life, because these nets are treated with insecticide, and the insecticide is very effective. If a mosquito lands on it, it's killed. However, the insecticide only lasts for a few years, and typically it needs to be replaced every 3 years. They're looking to extend it from 3 to 5 years. Now, imagine 100 million bed nets that have to be replaced every 3 years. So you have a situation where they were just being thrown away or discarded, some were using it for other purposes. There's a whole recycling effort around it now, where there's reverse logistics. How do you collect it from the community, you bring it back and reuse it in some other way? So as you can see, they're all mostly R's: reduce, reuse, recycle, recovery, and of course, the appropriate disposal. Okay. Give me 1 second, sorry. So what is the goal of a green supply chain? Minimize environmental impact, maximize efficiency, reduce waste, conserve resources, and promote sustainable practices. The various organizations mentioned below, many of them have various policies that are worth looking at. And so, fine, we do all this, but how do we know if we are succeeding? How do we know if we're making progress? And there are ways to measure the effectiveness of, let's say, a country's or a company's impact that they're creating or minimizing in terms of and how green they are. So, and each one has a different science behind it. What is the carbon footprint? What is the energy efficiency, waste management, water usage, supplier sustainability assessment? So if I'm a tertiary hospital, 1,000-bedded hospital, I am working with a lot of suppliers when it comes to goods and services. I'd like to, part of that assessment is to make sure that your suppliers, your vendors are also sustainable. So not just me as an entity, but everyone else that I'm connected with. Packaging, how can we reduce the packaging? And we did this for HIV/AIDS, where we had, this was at the time when I was working closely with the Global Fund. There was instead of each product being individually packaged and each one then being in another plastic package, the idea was, how do we minimize this? And it was a project we did with the UNDP to explore eco-friendly packaging and minimize the amount of packaging needed. And then the green certifications. Again, there are different sciences behind that. But indeed, there are challenges in greening the supply chain, especially when it comes to the healthcare industry. You've got a very complex supply chain. And often when it comes to the raw material and the sources that you're looking at, they're coming from various different parts of the world. So it's literally a global sourcing that could be from one country. The conversion from raw materials to finished goods would be in a second or third country, with packaging materials coming from a few other countries. those products then arrive at a target country, whether it's one of the 200 countries approximately, and there you've got a distribution system through the public sector, private sector, and within each of those, you've got sets until it reaches the front line, ensuring that you have included all the entire population. And when it comes to health sector, it's really complex because you've got hospitals, you've got distributors, you've got pharmacies, you've got micro pharmacies, and now retail internet pharmacies, and then the consumer themselves. Supply chain transparency, all the topics that we had talked about earlier. Do we have that visibility, how things are moving? Regulatory compliance, and all. The healthcare industry is more regulated than any other industry, and for very good reason, because it's directly linked to the safety of an individual. And all of that has tremendous costs linked to the supply chain as well. Cost, waste management, energy, stakeholder engagement. They're just, and regarding stakeholder engagement, and in fact, if you look at the attendees for this particular workshop, we've got government stakeholders, you've got academia, you've got private sector, consumers themselves, and then policy making bodies and organizations as well. And aligning all of them to agree on the way forward is not easy. So not surprisingly, there are a lot of challenges as we in trying to reach our targets of creating a sustainable and green supply chain. With that, let me briefly introduce you to Kavita, and then she'll take over from here. Kavita has more than 22 years of work experience in public procurement, logistics, and supply chain, working both at the national level and with international guidelines, such as with the World Bank. One of the key areas of experience is in the TV program, but she has worked with other entities as well. I'm going to stop sharing, and Kavita, the floor is yours. Thank you. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Thank you so much, Professor Paul. So let me just share my screen and I'll continue from where Professor left.
So, yeah, as we are waiting, so Kavita is going to be focusing on the success stories in the health sector, and we'll provide a few key examples, both at the global level and at the national level as well. Okay.
So thank you once again, and good morning and good afternoon, good evening from the various part of the country. I welcome you all. So moving forward.
Kavita, your screen is not, we don't see the slides yet.
Even now?
No, we see your screen, but we don't see the slides, unless it's me. Guys, anybody else? Can you see her screen, her slides?
No, it's the same thing here.
Okay.
Okay, I'll stop this and share it again.
Yeah, or if you want, yeah, just try that. If it doesn't happen, then I'll just continue sharing as well. Okay, try once more. In the
Is it
meantime,
visible now?
no, not for me. Wait, it's coming. Hang on. Yeah, we see the screen. You just have to open the PowerPoint presentation based on this.
Yeah, it's open from my side. That's why I'm checking.
No, let me just share from my side and then you continue. Okay.
That'll be better.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
But we still see Kavita's screen.
No, I can't see now.
Can
Is it
you,
okay?
Now it's
I
your
can
screen.
see now.
you can see my screen?
I can. But you'll have to go into the presentation mode, I guess.
Yeah.
Yes. So thank you once again. So my name is Kavita Nair, and I come with an experience of 22 years of experience in the areas of public procurement, logistics, supply chain management. As told to you, I've worked with the National TB Program, India, and I have the experience of working under the domestic and World Bank guidelines. I also have the relevant experience working with the World Health Organization, World Bank, Global Fund, and other donor agencies. So taking it forward from where Professor Paul left, I would like to talk about some success stories in the health sector. Now, when we're talking about the success stories about green, what does it come into mind? What are the efficiency? How are the how hospitals are managing it efficiently? The energy efficiency in hospitals. So many healthcare facilities have adopted sustainable energy practices by reducing their carbon footprint and cut down on the operational costs. For examples, the hospitals have implemented energy efficient lighting systems. They have installed solar panels. They have implemented the smart HVAC systems to optimize energy consumption. The HVAC system is now something coming up both in public and private sectors. And we have a lot of installations that's happening, which is saving the energy process. These initiatives have not only reduced the greenhouse gas emissions, but they've also resulted in a lot of substantial cost savings. This will eventually increase the GDP growth rate and everything, which is landing up finally in a substantial savings. Moving forward, when we talk about the telemedicines and digital health in the health sector, the success stories. The integration of telemedicines and digital health technologies has proven to be a game changer for the healthcare sector. These technologies not only reduce the physical visits of the patients, they are leading to decreased travel-related emissions. I would like to give you examples out here. Now, in our country, so I'm from India. In India, so as Professor Paul said, USAID, which is one of the unilateral international organizations, donor funding organizations, they have recently piloted a project in the northeastern state terrain of India, which is a difficult terrain. They transported drugs and vaccines through drones. So sending these drugs through a vehicle, especially if it is a difficult terrain, reaching out to the place, reaching out to the peripheries at the end of the place is very difficult. But now when you're sending these drugs through the drones, it becomes so easy. You're saving fuel, you're reducing the pollution caused by the vehicles. We have also piloted on collecting few sputum samples from these difficult terrains. Now, when we're talking about digital health, I can also give you one more example of Mohalla Clinic, which was introduced by the government of India. Mohalla basically means an area, a town, or a village where a drug dispensation ATMs are kept. So basically they have installed, this was again one of the USAID funding projects, wherein the automatic machines were kept user sensor technology to dispense medicines based on doctor's prescription. This new mechanism actually saves the need for a full-time pharmacist and helps doctors keep a tab on the medicines that are being distributed off the counter. So here we are saving the pharmacist's time and we can utilize them somewhere else. The drug dispensation machine has become one of the other reasons that we find it very effective out here is the patients do not have to go and stand in long queues and wait for the drug dispensation. They can just take the prescription, go to the counter, they can take out. It's something like when we go to the ATMs, withdraw money. It's as simple as that. When we talk about sustainable success stories, how can we leap out of the sustainable procurement? This also includes sourcing from suppliers with sustainable practices, using eco-friendly materials, promoting fair labor conditions, and prioritizing sustainability in their supply chain. The healthcare organizations are currently now driving positive change and encouraging suppliers to adopt sustainable practices as well. In the country, there has been a lot of policies changes on this, on the green supply chain management. The government of India is forcing the pharmaceutical companies to use more green and start reducing the wastage on it. The success stories in the health sector, when we continue about it, we talk about the pharmaceutical waste reduction. The pharmaceutical waste reduction, when we talk about, especially in the pandemic. So pandemic is one of the examples, different examples where we can quote. But however, if we notice in the pandemic, there was a lot of wastage that happened. The health sector, particularly the pharmaceutical companies and the hospitals, have implemented the GSCM practices to minimize waste generation by optimizing packaging, improving inventory management, and reducing over-ordering. So when I gave you the example of the pandemic, the over-ordering, it so happened in the country because of the lockdowns. It was there all over the world. The patients were unable to reach the clinics to take their medicines, because of which there was a lot of wastage of medicines. The pharmaceutical companies have now really worked upon it. I can give few examples of the companies right in India. So as you're aware, I come from free TB background. As you're aware, India is the largest manufacturer of TB medicines and to the global world. And all the manufacturers have now ensured that they are going to buy the products. The APIs will be fetched in only when there is the order will be split into 4 categories, and then the orders will be placed, thus ensuring that there is no over ordering and there is no wastage of the drugs and the materials and the raw materials. This not only benefits the environment, but also reduces disposal costs and contributes to more a sustainable healthcare system. Can we move forward? Next slide. So there are other green success stories also in the health sector from India, which we can talk about. When we talk about the COVID-19, the prevent single usage, we have seen how the world changed from a single-use mask to a reusable mask during the pandemic. When we talk about the biomedical waste management process, the All India Institute of Medical Science has clearly classified the biomedical waste into 4 categories based on treatment options. No untreated biomedical waste shall be kept stored beyond a period of 48 hours. So in our country, we have a good biomedical waste management process. The country is very stringent about that. There is a process that is set up, and it is a clear-cut instruction. Guidelines have been given. All the units, all the hospital, all the government sector, all the national programs have to follow the guidelines. And if they do not follow the guidelines, stringent actions are being taken. We talk about the digitization. We did speak about digitization. Digitalization of electronic health records used in multiple health facilities reduce the use of paper and improve accessibility to drugs and commodities at the nearest point. We can even, when we're talking about digitalization of electronic, we speak about a lot of softwares that's coming up. And this has reduced the it has improved the accessibility in drugs and commodities. So this is how the digitalization is helping the health sector. Next slide. So again, I give it back to Professor Paul. He can give us a view about what we learned more about supply chain and where. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm conscious of time, so I'll be very brief, just 60 more seconds. If you are interested in this topic and this area of study while you're working, most of you are working, do explore the various courses that we are jointly offering with UNITAR. They're all online, supplemented by webinars and technical assistance. And there are master's degrees, there are postgraduate diplomas, and all the way down to short 1 month, 2 month certificate courses. So Need more details? They're available. The link is there. We'll be sharing this presentation with you. Thank you very much. I leave the floor open and I will stop sharing, give the floor back. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Paul and Gavita, for this very interesting presentation. I see that we have quite a few questions in the Q&A, most of which have already been answered by members of this panel, so thank you for that. I'll just remind our participants once again that if you do have any questions, please feel free to write them in the Q&A. They will either be answered by someone typing the answer or in the dedicated Q&A session at the very end. So now without further ado, I have the pleasure of introducing you to Mr. Alessandro Sanchez Pereira, who will be speaking to us about the SMEP project. Alessandro, while you take out your presentation, I'll briefly introduce you and read your bio. Just one moment, please. So as the founder of Instituto 17, which is a nonprofit organization fostering sustainable development goals, Alessandro Sanchez Pereira is a senior lecturer at the Curtin University Sustainability Policy Institute and lead sustainability analyst with 20 years of professional experience working with the private and public sectors. He's also a member of the IPCC's Working Group 3 as lead author in Chapter 5 of the 6th Assessment Report, AR6. So it's a privilege to have you here with us, and whenever you're ready, please feel free to take the floor.
Thank you, Daniel. I think everyone is seeing my presentation now. So,
yes.
So problem. I hope to be as interesting as Kavita and Professor Paul were with all new information that they provide. But what I'll be trying to do here is just to showcase our experience in a project that was between Instituto 17, I-17, and UNCTAD, looking at manufacturing supply chains and how we could green this process in a circular economy context. So to start, Instituto 17, as Daniel already introduced, is a nonprofit in Brazil. If anybody wants to know more about us and what we do and our products, just use the QR code in the slide with your mobile, and you can get the information and direct connected to our webpage. So when talk about challenging in greening green supply chains or creating green supply chains, we have three usual suspects that Professor Paul already mentioned. And we just try to group them here. So we have technological challenge that we are facing right now. Some of the questions that were passing already in the chat was about technology changes that we need to treat some type of waste or increase efficiency in some systems. The other ones comes, as everybody knows, economic and financial challenge that we have. New technologies is costly. Especially if they are in the beginning and needs a lot of investment for finding new solutions. And we also have operational and organizational challenge that sometimes we don't know well our entire supply chain. So we can break down this in some points that we can look at. For example, how to mitigate those challenges. So, and the idea for us was, okay, we have this large number of challenges that we can break down in more specific ones. So if you're going to be looking at greening a supply chain in the manufacturing sector, how we can handle that. So the first thing that we did was to understand that all of these challenges still have a root cause or root challenge there that we can summarize in two of them. That will be traceability and transparency. If you go for each one of them here, you're going to be that they're going to be cross challenge and going to be covering any one of the topics that we pass here. So when we look at that, we start to see how we could start using our approach to mitigate those two main challenges. So when we look at transparency, for example, We have one of the biggest topic that we have for a green supply chain, that would be inadequate disclosure of suppliers and their environmental practice. So the issue is often supplies are located in countries that has a more relaxed environmental regulation. So how are we going to be tackling that? Because we don't have even the pressure of regulations for pushing them to green their supply chain, which will be sometimes in some contexts be more costly. So it's difficult to understand the footprint of products or compare products because of that reason. The other difficulty that we have is measuring and reporting indirect environmental impacts. Okay, I'm having this pollution here. What's the indirect impact that I'm going to be having? All these impacts are going to be located in my place or going to be allocated elsewhere. So this shows what Professor Paul was saying. Those are very complex problems. So in our project, we try to tackle this with two solutions. So to understand the disparity of different regulatory environments, we try to cover 13 countries, 10 in Sub-Saharan Africa and 3 in South Asia. So there is a very disparity on how these countries are creating regulations and dealing with the problem. For problem B, that is how we can report and measure impacts or even include indirect impacts. So the only way that we could do this was to use an input-output life cycle assessment methodology. That is a hybrid process that we get input-output so we can understand everything that goes inside of a country and everything that goes out of that country in economic figures that we can translate that in a life cycle assessment. So when you go for our second challenge, will be traceability challenges. And then, as we said, 13 countries, very complex, geographically dispersed supply chains. We need to understand those things. So it's very difficult to track the life cycle of all the products and components that's happening there. So the impact that we have, we are not able to understand the problems and how they can be translated and used to guide solutions or recommendations. And the same thing is that there is a lack of standardized global tracking systems. So we need to find how we can harmonize this. For example, in the project, we have 2 different systems that controls the flow of goods. So we have one that's the harmonized system, HS, and the other one is the ISIC. So they have different categories. So we need to, one of the steps that we did in the project was to harmonize these 2 systems in a way that we could have a better trace, because one of them showed the volumes that we are trading, and the other one was looking at the amount of money, and sometimes they have the breakdown of the specific goods that we need to look at. So once you have that, we try to solve the problem of complexity in the first one, trying to cover as much diverse manufacturing sectors that we could cover in those 13 countries. And once we have that, we went deeper in some particular cases. In the case of the output-input methodology, we now move to a process LCA methodology that will be looking specific in that case at that product. So on that, we translate this result, because the other thing that is important is we need to be accessible for those that need to get access to this information. Otherwise, we cannot create change. So governments need to have some support for knowing the figures that we were, as an academic or a consultant, we are used to deal with. So we need to translate that in more manageable way. So policymakers and local decision makers should look at and be able to use the information and change their systems. So we created a dashboard. That is the trade and pollution dashboard. This dashboard presents the life cycle analysis of these 13 countries and manufacturing sectors, we add a plastic life cycle analysis that's very specific for some products that will be substituted by others. So what will be the impact of replacing plastic in a given country? So we try to measure that and try to understand what the impacts of the substitute have. Because what we need to understand is replacing plastic, which is very necessary and is a problem that we have in our supply chains right now, especially in packaging, and also the product itself. Most of them can be also use plastic as material. And that's generating a big problem that we are facing now at the global level of plastic pollution. So we are looking at plastic there. But we need to understand this. The replacement of that plastic can also have environmental impacts. So we need to understand how to measure those impacts and see how that will play out in changing the supply chain of a given product. We also cover regional trade agreements because we understand that trade agreements is a very important mechanism for greening supply chains. And also, we try to include as much as possible background data from each one of the countries, for then we can understand the social and economic context with all those changes are happening in these countries. So when you go in detail in the dashboard, we start finding the information of the LCA. So here I present an example for you that is from the Bangladesh report. And the LCA analysis that we have two types of configurations. We can have a sector analysis where we compare all the manufacturing sectors that are important in Bangladesh or in the other 13 countries and see how the category of impacts appear in each one of those manufacturing sectors, which can guide us to understand where we can start greening the process. And the other way is to look at each category of impact. The other type of perspective that we have here, I'm just presenting for you now, that we call cradle to gate. What this means? So this means that in this particular life cycle analysis that we see for Bangladesh, we are covering everything from the production of the material or the extraction of the material being used up to their production in the industry, in the factory. We are not covering the user phase or the transport for the user market. So we stop our analysis in the factory level. So we try to look at all the impacts that stays in Bangladesh when Bangladesh is exporting this product to other countries. So this is what we call the embedded impact that a product produced in Bangladesh have when it is exported and used in other countries. The other analysis that we did is to look also, especially that will be important for us to have a better environmental management system and starting use the low-hanging fruits that's greening the production process. We can also reduce this system analysis for gate to gate, which is we start considering only the activities that happens inside of the industry or the plant. So here you can see how textile, leather products, chemicals, and non-metallic products and wearing apparel, it's placed in Bangladesh. And you see the different categories of impact. In the next slide, you see the same data now. Instead of showing by sector, we are showing by category of impact. And here we start to understand how the textile industry is very relevant to be the first one that we need to start greening in Bangladesh, because we understand now that when we normalize all the impact categories that happen in different sectors, we see that textile industry in that particular country is the main source of environmental impact. So we did this for all the 13 countries to try to understand which one of the manufacturing sectors should be the first one to attack. Because when you start about greening supply chains, we need to understand where we need to start. Otherwise, we can be investing a lot of time, money, and resources for particular particular supply chains that will not have a direct impact or a short-term impact in the country that process happening. So this type of studies start helping decision makers to understand where we should start tackling the problem. As I said, we did an analysis for plastic substitutes as well. So in this, so if you go then for the plastic analysis, we're going to have different materials replacing plastic materials. For Bangladesh, the material that we use was plastic bags that we're looking at. So we have plastic bags that is very much used for shopping. And we try to understand if you replace that for a textile residue, because jute is one of the materials that Bangladesh exports, and there is a lot of waste in that sector that could be converted into bags, in shopping bags that could be used daily in the country. So we try to understand this, how we can use a residue, create a bag that can provide the same service as a plastic bag for shopping. And when we start looking at the category level, we start seeing the benefits that we have between the jute bag and the plastic bag and the difference that happens. However, when we normalize again and start to look at specific them, so we're going to be condensing that, and then we're going to be comparing the two materials. We have the same analysis, and then we see all the benefits that replacing plastic bags with jute bag had. So we have a huge decrease, like we have an impact. We reduce the environmental impact in more categories than one. But if you go for example, for a different categories, we start increasing some categories. So we need to understand also the trade-off between those changes. And for those who are enthusiastic in life cycle analysis, we also show the function unit that we use for making this analysis and the comparison between the plastic product and the substitute. Other thing that's important to show is that all the database that we created for the analysis for UNCTAD is available for downloading, including the methodology. So one of the approaches that we had in the project is no black boxes. So all the information is transparent and everybody has access to it and can help us to improve our analysis. Also, we did some 4 case studies that we cover 4 countries. And this is an example for Bangladesh that I'm using since the beginning. And then we see that for each ton of jute yarn that is exported locally, we produce 2.1 tons of carbon that stays in the country. So there is this embedded carbon footprint for each ton of jute yarn that's exported. And we have these specific fact sheets for each one of these 4 countries here: Kenya, Tanzania, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. So we went deeper in these countries, and also we did analysis what was the impact of public governance in greening the supply chain, and also what was the private governance. That's quite important as well. And we noticed in these countries how important was the private governance being the leading movement for greening the entire process. So these are the resources. So the care codes here also you can have, if you use your mobile phone, you can have access to a playlist at YouTube when you have all the movies or all the videos, not movies. I want to be a movie star like this. So what we have here is the videos with all the project videos. So you have a short video about each one of the 4 cases, You also have a dashboard tutorial that you can link and learn how to use the dashboard. And the final one is the link directly to the dashboard that you can access and play around. In the dashboard, you have access to all the reports and also all the data sets that we use for creating the results. And as I said, I think my presentation is very short. I hope I made the time correctly. And if you want to know more about I-17, you have our contact here in the care code. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Thank you, Alessandro, for this most fascinating presentation. I see that we already have more and more questions coming in the Q&A. I think that's just a sign of how interesting or interested you made the participants. We'll finish off with our last speaker, Mr. Glenn Wilson, who will be speaking a little bit more about the SMEP project that was mentioned by Alessandro. While you're starting to share your screen, Glenn, I will introduce you by reading your bio. So Glenn Wilson is a program management officer with UNCTAD, working on trade, circular economy, and manufacturing pollution themes. He works as part of the Sustainable Manufacturing and Environmental Pollution Program Team, a 25 million Great British Pound initiative established by, pardon me, by UK Aid, focusing on pollution prevention in manufacturing sectors across sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, including plastics. Glenn, it's a pleasure to have you here. Whenever you're ready, you may take the floor.
Thank you, Daniel. I assume you can see my presentation, and we'll move forward. I'll try and keep it brief as well, because I know we are running over time. So Daniel has already introduced me. Thanks for having me here today. I'm going to go into more of a deep dive into some of our projects and just to show you what we're doing on the ground and what we're also doing at policy level as UNCTAD. So again, we're a £25 million funded project by the UK Aid. We work on two fronts mostly. We have projects, currently we have 5 plastic projects dealing with innovative ways to deal with plastic pollution in 5 countries of the 13 countries that Alessandro referred to earlier. And we are about to start funding 4 or 5 textiles projects. I believe they're all in Kenya. And we are going to launch a procurement soon for leather. And we are also about to fund 4 or 5 food and beverages projects, all to reduce industrial pollution in the supply chains, mostly for export, as UNCTAD is mostly focused on trade for development. So UNCTAD's main role is to connect these projects and to connect the findings from these projects to the multilateral processes, to regional organizations, and also make governments aware of the different options and solutions and what's going on, and to use these concrete projects for those purposes. So here's just last week in Paris, we attended the International Negotiating Committee for Global Treaty Against Plastic Pollution. So we hope that there will be a global treaty against plastic pollution by the end of 2024. Negotiations are long and difficult, and everyone has different interests. And I saw the question about the medical sector that was brought up many times as something that is difficult to replace the plastics in. So hopefully we can find solutions for that, but that is one area that is being discussed as something very difficult to find solutions for, but I'm sure we will. This is just a photo from a tannery on the outskirts of Nairobi, just to show the pollution element and what we're trying to find innovative ways to reduce pollution. Here it's mostly, you can see a lot of water. There will be a lot of water waste, contaminated water. How can we get all of these pollutants out of the contamination? And here is a tannery in Pakistan. Also, again, a lot of water is used in these tanneries. And as we all know, global water issues are getting worse. And here's how we can get from the dirty water to the cleaner water, and finding the best ways, the most efficient ways, the most affordable ways, and the most sustainable ways to clean the water. This is a textile mill also in Pakistan, and there's all sorts of pollution problems that we're trying to tackle in textiles, from air pollution, the waste from cutoffs when making garments, and there's a lot of water pollution and chemical pollution as well in the textiles industry. This is plastics near Accra in Ghana. This is a project that we are funding as part of the SMEP program. The project is trying to find the best way to easily capture the plastics that are flowing into the sea through the river and the lagoon, so that they can then chip the plastics and export them as a business, so that plastics can then be reused. So that's part of the circular economy, but they're trying to find the best way to capture these plastics and not interfere too much with the ecology of the lagoon as well. This is another project we have in Kenya. It's using collected plastics from the islands. It's in the Lamu archipelago near on the northeast coast of Kenya. And they are using the plastics. Everything you can see here is made of plastics, more or less, including the door and everything around the door frame, the boats. And they're trying to save traditional boat making practices through using plastics instead of wood, because there's also a shortage of the large trees they need around the archipelago, and more fiberglass boats are being used. So they're trying to do a whole different range of things to fit into the circular economy as well. A very interesting project, and some of you may have heard of them. They're also very good at communications. They make quite beautiful products. And here also linked to the health aspect and social equality and gender within the circular economy. This is an aspect which is coming more under the limelight as we try and transition towards a circular economy. This will affect people, it will affect jobs, and it will affect social equality, gender equality, and social inclusion, but we don't yet know exactly how. So we are trying to figure out how different policies will affect different groups of people and preempt that as well. So here the lady is sorting. She's taking the different plastic labels off the plastic bottles because they're different kinds of plastics, so they need to be separated. And so it's a very labor-intensive job. Here, plastics separated by color. And then again here, there's also health and safety aspects. Here, it's a plastics chipping machine that's being used in one of our projects. And this, I've just taken this from a recent report that's come out by the Global Plastic Action Partnership. It's on Nigeria. They're supported by the World Economic Forum, but they have some good work, especially in West Africa. And it's a study into the health and the equity aspects of the plastic recycling. So there's some very interesting points in there and some very interesting data that I think is interesting to go and have a look at. There's a link I've linked the title there, so when you have the slides later, you can click on it as well. And just one thing to point out, as we can see, the orange is women. This is distribution between men and women, mostly. And you can see that the sorters and washers are 98% women, which is very interesting. This kind of data, without data, we can only speculate. So it's good to have this kind of data to show us what's really going on and who will be affected by changes in what. This is a project in Nigeria, in Lagos. A really interesting project that's using data. It's very compact, very small, but I think they could have a really big impact. It's part of the SMEP program as well. They have collectors of the plastic waste around the city, but they use data to track how much waste they get from what locations in the city, so that they can use this data, they can monetize this data and sell it to the local authorities, or sell it to companies that then can use the data to decide where to collect the waste and make their logistics routes around in the most efficient way. And now moving on to some other work that UNCTAD's doing. So you've seen some work we've done with Alessandro, or Alessandro's done with us, which is really interesting and shows some of the life cycle assessment, life cycle analysis of replacing different products. Here we've tried to define what plastic substitutes could be and what plastic alternatives could be, to try and separate bioplastics from substitutes that do not have exactly the same properties. Apologies, I seem to have let me just share again. So hold on, I can't talk, and I think it should be coming back. Hopefully you can see that. Yeah, so trying to define this and then put it out into the world, and people can discuss it, and hopefully in the international plastics negotiations, this can be used as well to decide what are substitutes and what are alternatives. But there's a lot of debate around it still. Now I can't go to the next slide. Apologies again. I'm going to share a different screen. Go. We're almost there anyway. Conscious of time. And so the next slide here is looking at what we've also done is identified harmonized system codes. Okay, I will try and leave it on last time, and then otherwise I will just end there to not take too much time. I won't make it into full screen. That should work. Okay. Clicked on the wrong one. Here we go. Okay. Okay, so we identified 282 harmonized system codes, which are codes that are used at the border when we go from when goods are traded. So codes that are for substitutes, so that we can more clearly identify what substitutes are, because they're often bunched in with agricultural products, for example, which attract high tariffs. And when we can identify the different substitutes that we have that could substitute different kinds of specific plastics for different purposes, we can then, on the next slide, which hopefully will come up, yes, we can then identify where we could reduce tariffs. So work with the World Trade Organization to reduce tariffs on these specific substitutes that are not agricultural. They're not for agricultural use, they're for used to make cups or to make plates, for example, or to make medical equipment. And we can then reduce their substitutes to make them more competitive with plastics. There was also a question in the chat about plastics are very cheap and amenable. And so how can we justify increasing prices of replacements for plastics? Well, one of my responses is we can make replacements cheaper by reducing tariffs on them and reducing subsidies also for plastics products, because they're often subsidized as many subsidies in the petrochemicals industry, and they're made from petrochemicals. And so the next slide is looking at the trade in the substitutes products. We've identified $388 billion worth of trade, of which 2/3 is raw materials, and much of it is from developing countries. So this is an opportunity to increase trade in substitutes, but also to increase the products that can be made before traded, to increase the value of the trade. especially for developing countries. So it's a great opportunity. And then just to finish off with a couple of examples of substitutes that are being used. The one before was seaweed, a UK company called Notpla. They make almost cardboard-like products from seaweed. This company, Biolutions, is German-based, using different agricultural products to make packaging as well. And in the textiles industry, banana fibers are being used more and more. Bananatex, based in the Philippines. There are lots of plastics also in textiles, and so this is an important area to look at. And so that's why also we've got our textiles projects. And in the fishing industry, this is very difficult. In the marine environment, we have a lot of plastics waste, and the slide should be coming up. A lot of plastics waste, and so that one of our projects under SMEP is trying to they've made a biodegradable fishing nets. They're testing them now in Kenya and in South Africa, and if lost, they are heavier than the normal fishing nets and should sink to the bottom. And then when they interact with the bottom of the ocean, they should then biodegrade within 2 years. So it's a step, hopefully, in the right direction. And really important, it's already been said, reduce the amount of plastics we use and or reuse where we can, so designed to be reused and to be circular, or use substitutes or alternatives. And finally, to conclude, there are global regulations coming by 2024. It'll be tough to get there, and hopefully they won't be too watered down, but they are coming. And there is going to be more and more attention paid to the health and social aspects of circular economy and plastics recycling. And there are lots of business opportunities in substitute materials, preventing pollution, in services for washing materials that are going to be reused. So it's very exciting. There's lots of change coming. And thank you very much. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions for me or my colleague Enrique, who unfortunately couldn't make it today. Thanks, Daniel. I'll stop there, and hopefully I've tried to make up a bit of time.
Well, thanks a lot, Glenn. This was extremely interesting, really fresh, captivating information. So thanks a lot for that. Dear participants, unfortunately, we have run out of time. So despite the many questions that I can see in the Q&A, we will have to skip the Q&A session, but please feel free to write your questions by email and send them either to the email address that Glenn just shared now. Perhaps we could all share our email addresses in the chat, if that's all right with you. I'll do so myself here. Hope everyone can see. And please feel free to write your questions to us by email. We'd be more than happy to establish contact and have an exchange of notes. I see we've also received a couple questions on the courses offered by UNITAR and Empower School of Health, both the 12-month postgraduate diploma and our master's program on global health procurement and supply chain management. So I'll be sharing with you the link in the chat to those programs as well, and also via email. I'll just take this opportunity as well to formally recognize the value that was brought to us by our speakers, Professor Paul, Kavita, Alessandro, and Glenn. So thank you very much. I personally learned a lot, and I believe that our audience did as well. And on this note, dear participants, your feedback does matter a lot to us. So before leaving this webinar, if you could take a minute to share your feedback using this poll that should appear on your screens, we would be very grateful indeed. Well, so far, we've got 48 responses with a very encouraging result, if I may. So far, unanimous yes to the question, was this information useful? So thank you, participants and speakers, for this encouraging result. We're still at a unanimous yes after 107 responses. So it seems like people are mainly interested in health and supply chains, as well as circular economy. These are the areas which people would like to receive more information on. If people were to work in the health industry, they would be mainly interested in supply chain management. Most of the participants, 88%, are interested in enrolling in courses on this topic, namely in pharmaceutical management and global health. And we still have, after 145 responses, a unanimous yes on the first question, was this information useful? So on this very happy note, I want to thank you once again, Kavita, Glenn, and Alessandro. Please pass on my best wishes to Enrique as well. And thank you also, dear participants, for joining us today, and hope to see you in a month for our next webinar. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
very much.